recruiter watching this, and I'm sure you're recruiting watching this, that it's just one of those days. Scott, this is Scott Harrison, who is absolutely amazing. He is the VP of Talent Discovery at Formula Monks, driving powerful AI-led transformation. So that I want to know more about. But he was also the Senior Director of TA at DocuSign, and before that, led global recruiting efforts at Amazon. So we have a lot to dig as we were talking on winning the global war on talent. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm good. It's great to be here.
Yeah, nice. Okay. Well, before we kick off, we are really, well, see, I can't even talk today. But before we kick this off, this is hosted by Covey. So Get Covey is something that I use and I've used for a really long time. They're Covey Scout. So as a talent leader, I'm sure you're facing a lot of challenges, especially with providing a positive candidate experience while managing an overwhelming amount of interest in your open positions. Whole other webinar, I feel, and doing that with a resource-strained team. So Covey Scout is an AI-powered sourcer. Covey Scout, I like to call my best friend, but they wouldn't call it that, so it's Covey Scout. But they can quickly and easily screen through thousands of job applications and identify the top 5% of candidates that meet your specific criteria within an hour. So I'm actually doing a bit of an internal role right now where I have to screen resumes for the first time in my career in a different way. And I will say, like, yes, Covey Scouts. Yes, I don't want to be doing this. A human should not be doing this. But they also have helped tons of top tech companies like DoorDash, Rippling, streamline their recruitment process, which saves significant of time and money. And as a recruiter, I want to say sanity. So I'm going to add sanity to what Covey Scout brings to the game. Scott, when is the last time you went through resumes, or like, what do you hear from your team?
Oh my gosh. We've been talking about, for years and years, right? Automating the top of the funnel.
Yeah.
Right. When you're talking about finite amount of time that your recruiters have to, spend it throughout the week, you don't want them going through 100 resumes and maybe one or two actually are qualified. That time could be better spent on the phone with them, screening, actually making a connection, locking that person down, all of that. So yeah.
Yeah, especially because I don't know about you, but I like to be a hunter. The sourcing part is something that I do really enjoy doing. But as I'm screening these resumes, and again, hundreds of resumes, right? And so the first 5 minutes go well, probably my last 5 minutes don't. But whenever you find a gem in this, big thing, you're kind of like, well, shoot, I feel like I have to do this. I feel like this is something I need to do. So it's definitely a very interesting challenge for sure.
Well, and you can find that people have a bit of mission creep the longer you do it, right? If you start out with your yes, no, maybe pile, speaking of old school, we used to print everything out in
Yeah.
your yes, no, maybe pile. But these days, it really feels like the longer you're looking, the less probably discriminating you wind up becoming.
Oh, yeah.
All of a sudden, you have this inclination to maybe add somebody. And I think your ability to be very objective starts to wane.
Yep, 100%. Okay, yeah. So I know that's not what this webinar is about, but I couldn't help it because I was just going through it right now. But okay, now when we talk about winning the war globally, what do you feel like the key differences are between like domestic and global? Because you would think at the surface level, it seems it's got to be like the same, but it's a whole different beast.
It's interesting. I think the human connection stays the same, right? Obviously, when you're trying to make sure that is the key point, but how you go about it and maybe the avenues, the things you might consider in the back of your mind between the different, just from time zones, some of the cultural or social mores within the area, even to the employment laws that govern it, and how much notice period someone might give. It can be 3 months, and you've got to have that forefront of your mind when you start recruiting in that area, so that you can level set expectations downstream.
I did not think of that at all. Audience who has done global recruiting, I'm even curious to just Google right now, what countries need to give that long of a notice? Because when you choose what countries you do go into, all of that has to be taken into account. So where do you begin?
Well, and then, when you're talking about EU, that's a whole nother beast, especially when you have some areas In particular, and I don't, I hate to do kind of the broad brush,
Yeah.
but I'll just talk from a high level here, and even with Spain, when you're recruiting for somebody to be in Spain, um, there's a lot of hoops you have to run through to if you're going to separate or offboard them, because
Mhm.
if you don't do it well, it's not the individual that will be litigating your company; it's the country of Spain.
Oh, wow.
You have to really take some of those things into consideration when you're looking at it. It's the differences of, are we using an offer letter or is it a contract?
Uh-huh.
Are we paying in U.S. dollars, or does it wind up being in, say, Colombian pesos, for example?
Yeah.
So really, again, taking the full picture and going, okay, let's start with the end in mind, and then we can back from there and put together a sourcing strategy.
Yes. Okay. So that's really interesting. I don't want to stick too much on the HR side, but I can't help myself. How many conversations, and I'm assuming that HR and recruiting are having maybe the most conversations, right? As to
Correct.
like what you handle and talk through.
Yeah, when you start looking at, when we think about launching in new markets,
Mhm.
so where I'm at currently, we do business in 40 something countries. Um, and when you're thinking about going into a country or launching a new business or new business line or going after um, some new logos, as they say, um, it's getting in very quickly with HR, with your marketing team,
Mhm.
um, putting together a strategy on how you're going to execute an attack, and what you need from your supporting partners. So TD or TA can't do it all. We're the hunters in this
Mhm.
in this scenario. I think sometimes we're viewed as the Wild West, and so those other support functions sometimes want to come in and control us a little bit.
Yeah.
We want to understand where are the lines, and then as TA professionals, we'll take it all the way to the line, right? In our efforts to get it done, maybe even step into the gray areas a little bit when we need to. Uh, but when you're thinking about a new territory, a new area, a new country, it is all the research that needs to be done prior to that. Do you have already within your sourcing function the competitive intelligence, the business intelligence to support what you're doing? Have you done any marketing at all in that area? And not just sales marketing, but as a company, um, for the local population to even know who you are. So it's some of that you need to think through, and then the support of downstream. Okay, once we get somebody on, what does a standard interview loop look like? What does an interview process look like? And what are they used to? You've got areas where we were finding, even in the again, high level, just anecdotal, in the German market, right? You're doing LinkedIn, you're using LinkedIn. If your emails aren't in German, your response rate is extremely low.
Mhm.
And so you need to think about that. You don't want to find that out as you're going. You want to be thinking about that as you're putting together your larger strategy.
Yeah, so I mean, lots to unpack there, but I want to start with directly the language barriers that definitely come into play here. I mean, the different biases as well, right? So, do you suggest hiring a recruiting team where you want to be, or are you having the American recruiting team just try to be as inclusive as possible?
I think preferable would be local,
Hmm.
right? If you're able to do that kind of a resource. Um, I've done both, right? When I had APAC years ago at Amazon, I had one of my most successful recruiters for Japan, for the Tokyo region, was someone who sat here in Seattle.
Oh, wow.
He happened to he lived there before and spoke the language, but he still had sort of, he was Americanized in that, he was probably pushier than what a local person would be, and so
Hmm.
his close rate was higher.
Yeah. Oh, that's
So
super.
there's just, again, some of the cultural stuff that goes on. And then, at DocSign, we stood up a development center in India, went from 0 to 150 in 6 months. And the key to that was contracting with a local PEO,
Hmm.
and they have the recruiting resources on the ground. and then they can help kind of stem that tide until you can locate those individuals and stand that team up yourself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When I had a client that was going into Mexico, I also happened to have a recruiter who was fluent in Spanish. So at first they're just kind of going through like the steps of starting to reach out and stuff like that. And he came to me and he was like, "Our response rate's really low. Like, I don't know." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, are you speaking in Spanish?" He was like, "No." I'm like, "Hello." And what's crazy, and I'm for sure not saying who this was, the company had told him no. They said no because they need to work with us in the state, so their English has to be good.
Yeah,
So my fight was, I understand their English has to be good, but they're going to not get back to you if you're not going to meet them where they are.
yeah, yeah.
Then of course you can find out if their English is sufficient enough to collaborate. But I thought that was wild. So all of a sudden our went from nothing to significant, and we were to hire within just a few weeks, which was really, really, really crazy.
That's a great point. As a hunter, right? You're like, okay, how do I just start the conversation? How do I just get their attention?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that, okay, I love that part. That's it. Because as you're sourcing, as you're trying to grab talent, you need to start the conversation, right? So I think there's a lot of, I think right now, because it's so noisy, it's a very interesting market. It's noisy. We have people who are shouting that it's really hard. We have people shouting that companies are pickier. We were just kind of talking that through. But it is all just about starting the conversation and not assuming that someone's going to be super interested in you right off the bat. It's like, look, there might be some slow plays here. And I know that as recruiters, we're not really used to grasping that because it's like we have to move at a certain pace. But I think the lesson here, and would love your thoughts, is there is a faster pace we can move, but there is also long plays that can work out. And at the end of the day, it's like they can come together. It might not happen today, but it could be in a few months. Like, what is your thought like when your team is talking that through?
That's a great call out. I think, something, I say to my teams all the time, right? Let's be fast without rushing, right? Let's be purposeful in our movements. And so when you're talking about, there's competing noise. There's noise everywhere, and there's
Mhm.
1,000 things competing for these candidates' attention. And so, how do you craft your message in a way, right, that's genuine, it's human, and
Mhm.
that's intriguing, and piques their interest? I think one of the things that's super critical is your team's understanding or knowing what that unique selling position is, or the EVP. That's like when we talk about going back to basics,
Mhm.
right? Okay, is everyone aligned on what that is? Because we're on the front lines. You're having that conversation. You may not have that or get a chance to have that first conversation ever again. And so you need to make sure that you're crisp. What you're talking about is succinct. It's intriguing. It gets them wanting more. And without a solid understanding of what that USP is, you're going to fail.
I love that you said that because it brings us into the sourcing strategies in the different parts of the world. Because what might work as a selling component here
Mm.
might not work in another country. So, like, I think about, what I hear all the time from candidates where it's like, who's my hiring manager? What's the culture like? Is there work from home? How's the work-life balance? Like, there's just certain things right now, at least for me in engineering, that people are searching for. And it's like very common. It's like, look, I got like 6 things I know people want, right? But in different countries, you need to understand what they want and what's important to them. So how do you do that?
It's a great call out. Yeah, I mean, even here, in the States, it's when you're thinking about North America, even just the difference between the types of individuals that you're going after, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's a manufacturing, whether it's high tech, whether it's back office, even that type of thing. What they're interested in, what they need, is different and varies. Um, and I remember starkly way back in my career starting out in doing hiring for government systems,
Mhm.
and a lot of former military. And you could ask them to do something, and they would dot every I, cross every T, get it back to you quickly. And
Mhm.
then I switched to high tech and was recruiting programmers, and um, they were like, even back then, what would my office look like? Can I bring my dog? How will my computer be configured? And you're like,
Your
"Are
ping
you
pong table.
you want a job or not?" So it's come a long way, but I think to your point, internationally, what they're looking for, what they need, obviously, holiday policy
Oh
uh,
yeah.
is a big thing. Um, Even to the point of it's in maternity, paternity leave,
Mm,
it can vary, right? You think about the policy in Ireland, right? Folks
mhm.
can be out, or, paternity leave, not paternity, but maternity leave. They're out for a year, and
I love
here in
it.
the states, right? You've got everything, from 0 to 6 months,
Yeah.
and so it's just understanding. Yeah, back to what we were talking about, kind of the first conversation, right? And understanding not just what are the needs, but what are the hot buttons? What are the things that are most important to them in their life at that moment? Because it can change because we go
Mhm.
through seasons.
Yeah, and I was talking to someone the other week, and they were talking about how their life is in seasons. And she's like, you know what? It feels hard for me right now. This is just a hard season in my life. And I was like, it's actually a really great way to look at it. And I think, like, company wise too, yeah, we're in different seasons of growth. So I also that sourcing message is going to come across differently as well, depending on who you're reaching out to. So that's its own separate strategy. So walk me through, like, when, like, let's just say, like we've chosen a certain country, this is where we're going to be, we've chosen that we're going to use people in the United States, that works for us. How are you now, what's the sourcing strategy there? How do you start building pipeline?
So for us, first and foremost is we want to build a battle card.
Hmm.
I think that's critical to have a kind of a destination in mind. Understanding we're sort of doing this right now. I have one of my teams currently underway of revisiting and sort of refreshing our LATAM battle
Hmm.
cards. We think there's a big market there in the nearshore support models. So understanding, okay, where's the talent? Where do those pockets sit? Are they near university? Are they in major cities? Is it data science over here? Is it job development over here? Getting an understanding of that, and then figuring out who are our competitors
Hmm.
and what do they offer. Not just their salaries and what does their comp package look like, but what does their benefits look like? What are their offices like? What are their is it a hybrid policy? Do they have to have come in every 5 days of the week? Anything that you can get as far as competitive intel onto your battle card. So then you can start putting a plan together how you start your outreach, whether that's through LinkedIn and mails or you're going to start using. I think something that's often overlooked, even internationally, is folks with their ATS.
Hmm.
Seems to be the last place folks try to mine. And sometimes that's because the ATS is not very friendly and searchable.
Yep.
Um, but I don't know why that winds up being the last thing because folks are, if you've got a very robust international presence,
Mhm.
you're going to have applicants all the time. And so you could be running that or getting that search while you're also doing your external outreach.
Mhm. So what I feel like you're talking about to me is what I call like a sourcing map,
Mhm.
um, just like for competitors, essentially, right? So you make sure that your sourcers do all of this work, right? And like so they're required to do all of the research.
Yeah, it's part of the, whatever we call it, right? I don't like the term intake because that really feels like, again, it's sort of that order taker type of thing.
Yep.
We're a subject matter expert. And so when we show up to a manager meeting or we have that initial conversation with someone, whether they're standing up a new team, whether it's a consulting engagement, or whether it's one individual that they're hiring, showing up, having done our research before we even step in the door. It's a much more robust conversation for us, especially instead of just sitting there and just okay, okay, yep, yep. What about this? What about that? That seems like we've wasted time. We could have gathered that on our own.
Hmm.
We would have come in with some of our research already, right? I know you say this, but here in this market, this is the most prevalent, or this is what we should be going after. What do you think about that? All of a sudden, we're driving the conversation
Yeah.
and getting to a more successful outcome rather than, again, doing the intake and taking down the order, and then 3 weeks later coming back and going, okay, what you said, we're not finding that, it's not working. I can't, those skill sets, what about, could you have this skill set? Oh yeah,
Mhm.
that'll be fine. So instead of wasting that time, how are we more efficient with our initial meetings? And that's it right there. All of that goes into that sourcing strategy.
Yeah, I love that. So when you were building the sourcing strategy in the States versus other countries, do you feel like essentially it's the same process? Like it would be those,
Yeah, I think the mechanics are there,
yeah.
kind of the same. Now that you mention it, yeah, it feels like that would be the same. Whether you're going to go, are we going, are we going full time, or do we need a kind of an employment platform? Are we going to need to go remote.com, or a deal, or even a PEO to be
Mhm.
able to accommodate hiring these folks? But that's all part of sort of the pre-research before you get in and talk to that manager.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I want to go back really quick before we move forward with the marketing stuff. You said something a bit ago about like making sure that the country knows who you are, essentially, right? So to me, I always feel like as a sourcer, recruiter, whatever you want to call us, we are brand ambassadors. So, do you feel like before you do all of your homework, you would maybe start sending out messages just to get your brand out? Or do you feel like you would do all your research first and then go?
Well, hopefully, it would be a situation where um, it is a it's not a unilateral thing that TD or TA is doing, right? This is a concerted effort across the enterprise.
Sure.
The company made a commitment to launching, whether in this country,
Mhm.
and so we do have marketing resources, not just on the sales or demand gen side, but actual the marketing plan that we can then work off of to then send either we can then piggyback off of that with LinkedIn,
Mhm.
or have our own events
Yeah.
pointing to launches, that sort of thing. But it shouldn't be something that a TA is running. Um, if TA winds up running that, then we're in trouble probably.
Yeah, I was wondering. I guess it all depends on how big the company is, but essentially, normally when you go global, you're probably pretty big, or maybe just the country was better for what's going on. It's sometimes it can be significantly cheaper. But are you using any type of AI for going global, or I mean, or I should say, first of all, just in recruiting in general, because it shouldn't be different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've been trying to talk to a lot of not just my team, but peers, folks,
Mhm.
I've worked with other places, and figure out what they're doing. And it's so funny because I talk to 100 people. Everybody's got a different opinion.
I know. That's why I always ask.
How they're using it, it's so fascinating to me. I mean, where we're at here, we have an amalgamation of different ChatGPT, Gemini, the
Yeah.
different ones, and you can utilize, through our tool, you can utilize one or all of them or a blend.
Mm.
So it's interesting to see our recruiters right now in some of the templates they're building, and some of the strings and boolean that they put in to try to, how do we make this better, how do we crisp this
Mhm.
up, that sort of thing. So it's interesting. There's no shortage of really cool add-ons
Mhm.
to some of the existing tools. Not paid by Seek Out by any stretch, but they have a Seek Out Assist that's really cool, and the extra functionality that it does, really buying back time. So I see it as helping with some of the administrivia
Mhm.
and buying back time for our recruiters to be able to do the things that we want them to be doing, and not the okay, well, let me write this out, or let me figure out this JD, and okay, okay, what's wrong with this, and how do we help the manager sync this up? You can utilize those tools to help with some of the back office stuff.
Yeah.
So again, that we're spending more time in stakeholder management and candidate engagement.
Yeah, and then making sure that you're not wasting time throughout. So, like what I see a lot is that the hiring team and the hiring managers, they have to get it wrong for a few weeks, which sucks. It sucks for the recruiter, it sucks for the candidates that unfortunately went through the process sooner, and then it's easier for the ones that come in afterwards. So yeah, I absolutely agree that we should be spending time doing other things for sure. I remember when Covey first came to me a few years ago, and they were like, hey, use our sourcing bot. I'm like, absolutely not. Like no way. Like hands down, no way. They can attest to this. And I'm like, sourcing's my favorite job. Don't even think about taking it away from me. So, because like as throughout our careers, and it's not going to stop. There's constant tools out there that claim they're going to take our jobs. And we're not the only industry, right? This just happens to be the one that we're in, so we hear about it the most, right? But once I realized, like, look, I'm teaching the bot how to think like my sourcing brain. That's just the one who's actually sifting through all the pages for me. Because I know, like, when you're going through a search, it's like 1 to 40 pages, right? And you're like, all right, here it goes. Got time to eat my Wheaties, time to rock on it. And that's just doing it for me and then doing the messages. And then I'm on the other side. So I still get to do all the cool stuff that I want to do. I just don't have to be the one pushing the next page button.
There it is. There it is. Well, and when we think about, I mean, I think about it from several, aspects where use it as a force multiplier,
Mm-hmm.
right? We tell our teams all the time, right? Don't outsource your intelligence
Oh,
to this, right?
100%.
It's like it is a tool,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just another tool to be used. And where you get into issues or run into problems is when you have wholesale, just okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's the answer. Let's go. And it's again, it's back to the thing I like to talk about too, where folks talk about being data driven, and I get it. I go, we're data informed, right? Because we have experience to go along with that data that we're consuming and looking at. So it may be nuanced, right? It's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I think about as we go and as we think about it, leaders of teams, when you've got all of these recruiters and you're thinking about retention, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you continue to remove some of the administrative tasks off their desk and allow them to do the things that you want them to do, that you hire them to do, that they're passionate about doing, and,
Mm-hmm.
and not get stuck in the, click hell and
Yeah.
on all of that kind of stuff. Oh, I forgot to
Right.
fill this form out. I got to get this done. Like that just is soul sucking. And how do
Yeah.
we help utilize AI and some of these tools, which I think they'll help us in getting to a point where we'll have higher level of attrition of retention, because the job satisfaction will go up because we've
Mhm.
removed some of that stuff that's just nobody wants to do that. You want to be out searching, sourcing, like you said.
Yeah. Talking to people, that's our jam, right?
Yeah.
I totally agree. I totally agree with that. There's some good nuggets that I just have to call out for everyone listening because I know I've been ferociously writing over here. Fast, but not rushing.
Mm.
That's, I think, a game changer. Don't outsource your intelligence. I know you just said that, but I have to just say it again. Don't outsource your intelligence. We're here for a reason. We're subject matter experts and data informed because you're right. Data driven data. I mean, I've done webinars on being data driven, right? Like
Mhm.
it is really exciting, but I think it's also overwhelming to be like, what data do we look at? What data do we care about? And
Yeah.
it's like, all right, well, let's take a step back because we're in it,
Mhm.
but I think the data driven and data informed would be to bring it to the hiring manager and hiring teams so they can look at it and understand what we do, why it has to be done a certain way, and what we need from them.
That's
I
so
think
huge.
that,
That's so huge. I'm glad you called that out because every well, getting a hiring manager or a stakeholder, either on the phone or in a meeting or on Zoom or whatever, right, is
mhm,
hard enough as it is.
yeah,
So when we show up, right, we've got to be on point, right? There's it's marketing, right? There's no neutral interaction. They either think better of us or less of us.
Yeah.
And so every time we go, we got to be prepared and we got to add value.
Mhm.
And I think that's the key right there. They think we're sitting around waiting for the magical candidate to just apply.
Mhm.
What's recruiting doing? Oh, we're just sitting over here. Hopefully someone will apply and they'll be the right person. And so every time we meet with them is an opportunity to educate them,
Yeah.
get rid of that disinformation and educate them all the things that we do and all the value that we bring.
Woo, love it. We're going to be replaying this again and again and again. That just like that portion, just so you know. Okay, let's get back to some global stuff. So when you're going through the sourcing aspect, do you, and like, let's just say you can't hire a team in that country, it is a different language. I'm assuming then that's kind of when AI can come in and kind of help translate at least like the hello, hey, how are you? Or what do you feel like that message should feel like?
Yeah, it's really interesting with the tools now.
Hmm.
It's a lot easier to do that, but it's also scary because if you again don't have cross-functionally somebody that can help with that, you can't just, for instance, be North America centric and trying to recruit internationally and put it in one of these translators and think you're good to go.
Right.
I mean, it's a recipe for disaster. And again, we're talking big or larger organizations. You'll have the ability to tap into help or assistance from possibly one of your ERGs,
Hmm.
or being able to work with HR to locate someone that might be able to, especially if they're working on contracts within
Hmm.
legal or HR, and putting them in that local language, then we can work with them to start to craft templates, and they can help us with that as well.
Okay. I like that. So, I mean, I think really like what I would learn from this is that when or if you're going to go global, you better make sure that if there's a language barrier, it's probably best to build a team there because also it's more respectful as well, but you'll be able to move faster and more thoughtful, I think. Probably
Well,
better results.
and it's interesting too, based on the region, right? And India is such an incredible area and such a robust area for talent, and it's burgeoning, especially within the tech space.
Hmm.
And every major company has some form of a dev center over there, but it still at times can be a bit like the Wild West.
Hmm.
And just because you've gotten a resume doesn't mean it's the resume of the actual person that's interviewing in front of you. And just because they accept it doesn't mean that's the actual person that's going to show up on day one. And they're still it's they're still interviewing even though they've accepted.
Hmm.
There's a big fall off between the acceptance and actually them starting, and so you need to put that percentage, sort of into the mix as you're planning and thinking about it as well. So having somebody there locally in that instance is
Hmm.
critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I just had a company who does have a really big presence in India ask if I would recruit for them. And I was like, I had much like the company, much like the talent leader. I'm like, I can't because of I wouldn't understand. Like there's like I would get frustrated because I have heard what you just talked about. I would get very frustrated. It moves a different way. And I feel like my boots aren't on the ground there. And I wouldn't add the value that they would want me to add,
Yeah,
not the same one.
and I think there's something about, we say this often, right? It's like, think globally, act locally.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to show, especially if you're coming into a new region, that you're not just from the outside kind of looking in, right? That
Yeah.
there's a local presence here and there's a commitment. And it's also a lot where it goes a lot further to get folks to return a call or return an email if there's going to be a local presence, right? It's like, well, where is your office even? Right? Where am I even showing up? And I know things are, especially like our company, remote first.
Yeah.
And so it can be a little interesting, but sometimes you'll have a back office in an area for folks to actually show up.
Yeah.
Even if it's something, like co-working space, industrious we work, whatever.
Yeah, I agree. So when I first started recruiting, so I've always lived in Southern California, but my LinkedIn's always said San Francisco because that's where I recruited. And I didn't want to confuse people. To your point, I wanted to act locally. I even got a 415 number to the area code, right? And so I wanted to immerse myself as much as possible. So I didn't feel like an outsider, or I didn't even get treated like an outsider. I'd go, sometimes monthly, then I moved to quarterly because I needed to be able to walk those same streets that my candidates walked. I needed to be able to go on the BART system so I can understand how stressful that might be. So I went all over the place and learned it like the back of my hand. I don't live there because I don't love it there, but that's my own thing. But I needed to understand like I needed to walk in those offices that I knew that they would be walking into, when we were still interviewing in house. So I absolutely agree with that. And that's why, again, like to recruit in a different country, depending on the country, I think would be very difficult if you didn't vibe and understand the cultural differences. So how do you handle the cultural differences when you're recruiting and when you're building strategy? Because again, biases creep in too. So that's like the easiest, thing to do.
100%. And I think what we see oftentimes, especially with companies that might be based in or headquartered in North America,
Mhm.
is this, I don't know, it's almost like a fallback. So whenever you're scheduling calls, we're scheduling calls for when it's convenient for us, and then
Mm,
we forget about the time difference,
that is
right?
true.
Especially, whether it's India, whether it's the EU
Mhm.
or even APAC, we're way late into the night. For us, that is a telltale sign for someone, right? We're reaching out. It's even the time that you're reaching out, and
Yeah.
you have to craft that in your message, right? Just letting them know, um, because you want to be able to communicate that. Again, back to it, it's like a humanness. It's like, oh, you know what? I totally understand what and respect kind of your time zone, what you're going through, your area. But it's very tough to learn it because we're continuing to do it from a North America lens, and that
Mhm.
we run into issues all the time. That when recruiting internationally, when talking to folks, that is one of the things that stands out, right? So okay, well, I'll come, okay, I want to accept, but I can see already it's going to be one of these where I'm going to have to shift my hours, or I'm going to have to change my working schedule to accommodate yours.
Yeah.
And and in some instances it can happen, in some it can't. And what you don't want to do is lose out on some of the best talent because you're forcing them to acquiesce to your schedule here.
Yeah.
It could be a really big issue.
Now, I have to talk about because you're leading me down like kind of a little rabbit hole of compensation.
Mm.
Because I do know that depending on the country as well, they'll totally adapt and like, no, 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 we'll adapt to your guys' time. So I mean, they are bending over backwards because we can pay significantly more than they would probably get paid in their own country. So what are your thought processes there? Again, let's just like whether or not we are setting up shop there or not. Like what do you feel?
Yeah, it's kind of a loaded question. I mean, I think
Yeah, I know the hard one.
it's because we're seeing, you know, we're we're seeing the company I'm a part of right now. We're in the midst of consolidating, right? We're it's been years in the making, and trying to consolidate from the 30 something acquisitions that we've had in the last 4 years, all across the globe,
Hmm.
and trying to consolidate. And within TD, we even see it where we're recruiting within, say, Venezuela,
Mhm.
and we're paying USD. And there's another team within our larger company that's recruiting in Venezuela, and they're paying in the local currency, pesos.
Oh wow.
And so you wind up having
Yeah.
a bit of the internal struggle with our function. Not to mention, what does it do for the company and sort of our reputation in the region? And
Hmm.
so, obviously, being very respectful in that regard. Obviously, they're gonna. they're going to want to come and work over in this section, which makes it difficult for our other company that's trying to. So it's complex. Again, that's part of back to the original thing that we were talking about when you're mapping out a region or a new country that you're going into. You know, how are you going to pay it? What are the contracts that you have, and what do those mandate for the payment, or how you're going to choose payment? Is a contractor, or is a full time? Can you hire full time in that? You know,
In that region.
or does it wind up having to be a contractor? So it's just it's so complex, and there's so many things to look at. I think it can be sort of a thing where people go, oh my gosh, it's international. It's so cool. It's so fun.
Yeah.
And it is. It's great because you're getting to know, all of these new and interesting people, and firm believer that the more diversity, the better.
Sure.
It's going to raise our level of consciousness, and it's going to bring better solutions for sure.
Mhm.
Um, but it's one of those where you just can't run in and do it. You've got to be very careful and purposeful about how you execute.
Yeah, I mean, I've never had to do something like this. I've always been on the side. Like I've definitely recruited in different countries, not a ton of them, but I'm also external. I didn't build those processes. I didn't start those things. So it's always fascinating as I'm listening here, and I'm sure the audience can agree if they haven't done so, that there's a lot to think about. This is not a fly by the seat of your pants operation on this one. Like this is like how many months do you feel it takes to really put this strategy together and enter a different country?
Ooh, well, hopefully you've been given a bit of a forewarning or a glimpse into the roadmap, right?
Mhm.
Oftentimes at larger companies, there's an expansion roadmap. Okay, what are we doing? And we're looking probably 3 to 5 years out. And so you could start to orient your thinking that way, start to build your systems, start to do your research. And then oftentimes it's 3 months. This opportunity came up, we're doing this. Or it could be one of those where it's sort of you're buying a technology,
Right.
right? And we're going to do a lift and shift. We're going to take everybody and bring them,
Mhm.
just put them a part of your company. And so gosh, the more time, the better, because the other one involves a lot of extra time and a lot of non-standard hours, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah. Holy moly. And I was also thinking, of course, like tech moves at like lightning speed, all of a sudden they're like, and we need 25 people. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
great.
we're going to stand up a dev center in India. We're going to do it we're going to start in less than 45 days. Okay, all right.
Okay, it's
No,
time to rock and roll. Time
let's
to,
go.
build it as we fly.
Yeah, yeah.
So the crazy part, we are already at time, but I have to ask one last question. I always do this. We always go at TNT over. But what are the best ways to build and maintain the global talent pipeline? I feel like
Mm.
that's a bit different. Or is it?
You just on a high level, we're going through right now and looking at doing a sort of a postmortem and looking at the last couple of years and okay, what are the areas that we've recruited in the most?
Mhm.
What are the trends? What are we seeing? Where and then trying to align like an always on pipeline
Mhm.
around those. I mean, I think it's sometimes we get scattershot and we're just we get stuck in this kind of just in time. Oh, you have a new opening. Oh, okay, let's start working on it,
Yeah.
instead of trying to look historically and go, okay, how do we plan? And
Yeah.
what
How
are
long
these
did this take?
trends happening,
Mhm.
right? And how can we then, and that's if you've got a robust sourcing team, that, sourcing and research team, you can stay ahead of that and you can see those coming. And even if you're not building large pipelines, at least you can say, okay, in this region, it looks like we're going to wind up standing up in the next 3 to 5 years, looks like we might have a dev center. We might have, say, we need to build hardware that's going to happen in Israel. So let's start putting together a pipeline. You just, again, it's the pipelining I think is so critical.
Yeah, 100%. And that's also, I think, where technology does come into play, but also the thought process of a recruiter keeping their projects and relationships really strong, and
Mhm.
their connections, and not just like connections to have connections, but like
Yeah.
actual thoughtful, like thoughtfulness
Right.
there,
Right.
for sure. Scott, this was phenomenal. I could definitely, I have like all these notes and I have like literally 8 more questions I want to ask you, but we got to go. And so I want to really, really thank you for your time. We'll put you, like anyone wants to pick Scott's brain, I'm sure, you're open to that and vice versa. That's what we're here for as a community. This is why we do these webinars and why we dig so much. And Covey, thank you so much for letting that happen, because we have been partnering on this for a little while and say, hey, let's talk about things that really matter. And I think that this is something that really, really matters and is challenging for sure, because not a lot of people have global experience.
Yeah. It's fun, again, as a community, right? We're sharing, right? We're all learning together.
Sharing is caring.